Pontius Pilate woke up on that Friday morning centuries and centuries ago, and he had no idea that his involvement in the events that would enfold him and others over those coming hours would cause his name to live in infamy on the mouths of billions and billions of people down through the centuries, crucified under Pontius Pilate. Unlike a lot of the characters that are named in the Bible, we know some things about Pontius Pilate from sources outside the Bible. We know that he was appointed governor of Judea in 26 AD and served in that role for 10 years until 36 AD. We know that he likely had some previous military and administrative responsibilities in the Roman Empire. And we also know that being appointed the governor of Judea in the first century was not exactly a plum job. Some of you have traveled and lived in different places as part of your advancement in your professional life, in your career. And it may be the case that if for some of you, you had an assignment in a place that wasn't where you hoped to live out your days, but you wanted to do a good job. Certainly, Pilate wanted to do a good job as governor of Judea. He had one major task. As a colonial administrator of the empire, just keep the peace in the province over which you have responsibility. And for Pilate, that meant, can we keep the peace with the Jews, the dominant people group in Judea, as you know? Well, Pilate had his struggles with this one task. Even before the trial of Jesus. We know, for example, that there was a time when he, raided the temple treasury, the Jewish temple funds to help construct an aqueduct. That caused a riot. Another time, he refused to remove the standards or the insignia of Roman soldiers who were moving about in the Jewish precincts, which went against the second commandment against no graven images. And he knew this, but he refused to remove them from the Roman soldiers. That too caused a riot. So he's having a difficult time, and now he faces this. This itinerant Jewish preacher is brought into his precincts. He is embroiled yet again in a hot Jewish mess. Moreover, at the feast of Passover, lots of people in the city of Jerusalem. As you know, there really are two trials of Jesus, not just one. There is the religious trial. Jesus, after he's arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night before his crucifixion, is taken and held through the night at the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, and he's interrogated by the religious leadership there, Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, and Caiaphas. But there's the second trial, which is not the religious one, but the political one. Jesus' confrontation with worldly power, with Rome. And Jesus in John's gospel has already been revealed to us any number of times as the Word made flesh, the very embodiment, the physical form in human flesh of God's divine sovereignty. He's ultimate truth. He's the bread of life. He is the light of the world. And I think John in his gospel, in this section that we've heard, wants us to pay particular attention to the encounter of Jesus' rule with Rome's rule, their claim to worldwide rule in the form of Pontius Pilate. So today in the life of the church, we have white. This is a high feast day. It's called Christ the King Sunday. This is the last Sunday in the church year. I know you are aware of this. We don't measure time in the life of the church from January 1st onward, but rather we have inherited down through the centuries, the global church actually, this way of marking time that begins with Advent. Advent begins next Sunday, believe it or not. And what is Advent about? It's about waiting for God to come into our world. And he comes into our world at the end of Advent and the beginning of Christmas, right? How does he come? He comes as this vulnerable little baby. And we celebrate that at Christmas. And then we have the season of Epiphany and Lent, and of course, Easter, and then Pentecost, and all those Sundays that follow after Pentecost. This whole narrative arc tells us the ways that God has redeemed the entire world through the person of Jesus. And on the last Sunday of the year, today, we celebrate that Christ is cosmic king. From infant little baby in the manger in Bethlehem to Christ the King, Lord of Lords. And they're the same person. He encompasses it all. So we celebrate that today. And I think that our worshipful proclamation on a day like today, this particular day, invites the question of us, not just corporately, but personally. How is Christ the King of my life? Would anybody see that, know that, experience that through my life if I didn't tell them? In what ways would I love Christ to be more and more my sovereign, truly the Lord of Lords over all my loves? So John tells us that Jesus is taken from the religious trial with the Jewish leadership to the Roman praetorium, which is Pilate's Jerusalem headquarters, literally adjacent to the Jewish temple there. And we're told in John's gospel, before the verses that you heard, that this happens first thing in the morning. And the reason for that is because this is the time of day when Roman officials get most of their work done, from early in the morning to about midday. Because for high Roman officials like a governor, the afternoon was for organized leisure activities, mainly spent in the baths, say at the country club, if you will. And so I think it's maybe instructive to read between the lines here that Pilate is going to deal with this issue, but he's got other things to do today. And I've often thought that when I hear the Passion narratives read in Holy Week, where this scene, Jesus before Pontius Pilate, it's like it really depends on the voice of the actor or the reader. And it's hard to know exactly how to take this scene. And I used to think it was a kind of quiet and private conversation. Pilate's intrigued by Jesus. But the more I read the story, the less I think that's true. I think Pilate is just irritated. I think he's very impatient with this whole thing. He asks two questions. And speaking of irritated, I don't like the fact that the editors of our lectionary made this so short today. There's a lot of material right before what you heard and right after that I'm going to reference here today. But Pilate asks two questions. He's like, what have you done to Jesus? Why am I having to deal with you? I mean, of all times of year, we got hundreds of thousands of Jewish pilgrims in the city and another riot with you. What have you done? Are you the king of the Jews? That's what they're saying. Not that I care, but what do you say? And Jesus responds, essentially, you don't even know what you're asking. Because my kingship is not of this world. My kingship is not like yours. It's not like Caesar. I was born for this purpose. I was born into this world. The Word made flesh so that you and all worldly powers would understand that you have your being under an infinitely greater authority. I am the truth, Jesus says. In the very next line that was cut off for some reason today, Pilate famously asks, what is truth? What is truth? And again, I've always thought, for a long time, I thought this was kind of a wistful question. It's like Pilate saying, finally, somebody that, I can have a real deep philosophical discussion with. What is truth? Let's have cigars and a glass of cognac and talk it over. But actually, again, just reading the text, that's not in there. It seems to me like an impatient deflection because Pilate immediately dismisses the conversation. Here is Pilate given this God-given opportunity face to face with the Word who is God, hearing the words of the Word, if you will, and He's not interested. He's I got to get to the baths later today. Let me deal with this as quickly as I can. He is a man who's shaped to think of kingship in terms of politics and power. He has no idea of the opportunity that sits in front of him. And so he passes on it. He's got other concerns, other things on his mind, other things to worry about than whatever this guy's saying. And so he becomes an instrument of worldly power, working against the very power of God that will lead us to the cross. How do we let Jesus, the Christ, truly be king in our lives? Christ not merely as a vague benevolence, not simply as a kind of moral example or a spiritual teacher, but our sovereign. Again, the Lord of Lords over all of our loves, the highest love. Well, the case for me is that I can't make that happen naturally. As much as I think it, desire it, I can't will myself to make Christ King of Kings in my life, because it's not something learned naturally as much as it is yearned for as a spiritual or supernatural gift, a gift of grace. Today we're invited simply to, again, open our lives, our hearts, to the movement of God ever toward us in this one who lives and reigns even to this day. Lord God, would you come more deeply into my heart as my King? We will experience this. We will have testimony that this is happening when we do, in fact, have glimpses of the truth. The truth. When we experience forgiveness, maybe offered or received, that doesn't come from my will, but from thy will. When we have an awareness of some reality beyond this world that is even more real and true, even if it's a glimpse, what we might call hope. It was the great Jewish convert to Christianity in the 20th century, Edith Stein, and she died at Auschwitz in the 1940s, who said that Christ is sovereign over our inmost being, the center point of the soul, when there has happened a surrender, when we've bumped up against the limits of ourselves and what we can expect of the world, and that's the place when we cry out for God to come into our hearts. Jesus has entered the precincts of Pontius Pilate, who rules on behalf of Rome, who represents the very embodiment of worldly power. And Pilate accepts neither the possibility of something new and powerful here, nor does he experience or express any desire for it. And I think about our own experience with worldly powers, especially over the last years. You name your window of time. A generation, maybe even, of great division, disorder. Some people have even said the world's on fire. And maybe too many of us, especially stoked by the media and other leaders, this is all there is. And so in light of that, I want to end with an illustration. So when I was in high school, probably like some of you, I had a summer reading list every year. I had to read several novels every summer. I'm so grateful for that because I read some novels I probably would have never otherwise read. One of them was Lord of the Flies. Some of y'all remember that book. If you've never read it, you need to read it, by William Golding. It's a parable, okay? And it's about a group of boys who were stranded on an uninhabited island. Again, it's a parable. And as these young boys try to organize lives together, things devolve into conflict, and then into violence, and then to utter savage mayhem. And as you're reading the novel, you yourself as the reader get caught up in it more and more and more and more. And the island is literally now on fire as you get to the end of the story. And the boys are running out to the beach, and they encounter an adult, a British Navy officer who has seen the smoke coming from the island from his ship and goes to the beach. And everything stops because the boys come to their senses and realize, who do we think we are? There's an adult on the island. This is a day to suddenly awaken again that there is Jesus on this island home. There's somebody in charge. Thanks be to God. Christ the King. Pilate had a full day. He had other things to do, other concerns, and he has been judged. He's been judged by the centuries, crucified under Pontius Pilate. And we too are judged, but we are those who know who our judge is, and he is the Christ who judges us with his love and his mercy. Thanks be to God. Amen.